How can we be serious about changing the health of the population when in schools, when in hospitals, it's full of crap? It just doesn't make any sense. And these days, and I'm seeing it in kids and teenagers in my practice all the time, not being able to switch off is endemic and it's causing big, big problems. And I think we struggle as adults, right? How are kids going to cope in this world? And I really worry about that. So you're pouring money into a broken system. If you want to effect change, you've got to go back to basics. Taxing this here or thinking just reducing a little bit in processed food here is going to make a massive difference. I think you're fighting the wrong battle. Let's get back to basics. Let's get kids taught how to cook in every single school. Let's get junk food out of every single hospital.
Hello and welcome back. This episode is proudly sponsored by Health IQ, a progressive and forward-thinking life insurance company that rewards health-oriented people, nutritionally oriented people, physically active people just like you and me save money on their life insurance premiums. See if you qualify and get a free quote by going to healthiq.com/HIH. That's healthiq.com/HIH.
I guess perfect morning routine for me is get up at 5, sort of tiptoe down the stairs. If I don't tiptoe, my daughter or my son will hear and they'll come down and then there ain't no morning routine anymore. Yeah. But assuming I can get downstairs without waking them, I'll come, I'll have 2 big glasses of water. It's a simple way for me to make sure I'm drinking enough water is I get 2 in first thing. Often I'll put a bit of lemon in it. Then I'll sit there for 10 minutes, 15 minutes sometimes, and I'll meditate. At the moment I'm using Headspace because I'm struggling to switch off at the moment. And so at the moment it's quite nice for me to press play and listen to someone guide me through it. Whereas other times I can just sit there. But yeah, so meditation for me is quite important. Then I will meticulously weigh out my coffee. And whilst it's in the French press brewing, I'll then do some glute activation exercises, so these step-ups. And I really feel good when I've done a bit of light movement in the morning. It's nothing heavy, there's no weights there, it just gets my body moving. I feel really, really good at that point. So I try not to put on social media, my phone. I don't always manage it, but I generally find that if I don't go on social media first thing in the morning, or I don't go on my emails first thing in the morning, I tend to have a better day. I tend to just be a lot calmer. Yeah. So, you know, that's probably what an ideal morning looks like to me. And then I guess if I'm feeling motivated and I've got time, I'll maybe come in here and do some sort of lunges. I'll do some sort of kind of sort of mobility exercises, some squatting, and often one of my kids will then come and join. But then they join in.
It's awesome.
So I love it because I think, all right, well, why don't you join me? And then I'm hoping to lead by example with them because I can keep telling them what they should be doing. But I think it's much better if they see daddy do it every day. Yeah. I think they're much more likely to go, oh, you know, I'm going to try and do that as well. So that's probably my ideal morning.
Yeah. That's awesome. You know, one thing that I found with the not getting into the email and the social media thing, and the temptation there is when you're using the apps to help with meditate. So that's it. You have to really be exercise that willpower first thing in the morning. Otherwise, it's tempting to go, well, let me just check in on Instagram real quick, and then it turns into a 10-minute ordeal. So,
yeah,
key.
You're right because it's tricky. It's so nice to have it on the phone, but then by switching your phone on, you know, that's why it's much better if I can actually not put an app on and just sit there for 10 minutes and reflect. And actually now that it's getting summer here, sometimes I'll go in the garden and I find just the breeze or the birds that allows me to switch off. So there's quite a big shift for me when it's light and it's summer outside. I can then get outside and that helps me. Then I have no phone then, so that's much better. That's,
you know what? And then the added stimulation from the sound, the birds, it really helps you to just focus on that instead of the monkey mind, I found.
Exactly. I'm too heavy. In the morning it's just, well, it's a couple of things, but this is just sort of, just to get my sort of right glute firing, I sort of go round the clock. Yeah. And I find it really, really useful. And then I'll sort of do that a few times. I'll do it with this leg as well. Yeah, I just, you know what, I don't have any rules. I just sort of do the other thing I learned from Gary was this one. This really helped me out on my back when I had problems. So what I do is, it looks a bit funny, but you know, it works, so I don't really mind. But this is really great because Gary has split up everything into, there's a load of science behind this as well. His book is amazing. It's called What the Foot. And he's the only person who managed to fix my back.
Okay. Wow.
For 10 years I had problems.
Interesting.
Your system is holding it there.
Yeah.
And
wow.
You know, so his book's called What the Foot.
And he's local. Here.
He's in London, yeah.
Okay.
He's in London.
Wow.
Super good stuff. Yeah.
What the Foot.
What the Foot. Yeah.
Cool.
Right.
Cool.
Dinner time.
Alrighty.
That reminds me of a podcast you did with Dr. Jeffrey Bland. I think maybe a couple of years ago.
It was a while ago, yeah.
Yeah, but he was talking with you about the taste receptors that we have in our gut, the M cells, I believe, from that podcast.
Yeah.
And sort of the bitter compounds. So let's say kale, for example, the bitter compounds stimulate those M cells, and then that causes the incretins to change, and things like GLP-1. Is this is all fitting into that picture?
Exactly. Yeah. So the bitter foods and fiber too are another mechanism, another, I should say, dietary component. Even exercise upregulates that. So, and when we think about unhealthy foods, they're generally bland. They're not bitter. They're devoid of color, so they have no phytonutrients, and they're often devoid. The processed foods are devoid of fiber, and those are all the compounds that naturally upregulate these incretins. And if we think about why dietary fat is somewhat satiating, it also increases CCK and GLP-1. So that maybe one mechanism through which a low-carb ketogenic style diet actually affects the body is through these gut hormones. So pretty powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you were saying some of the things that you can do, you mentioned the colours, the different polyphenols, but you also mentioned eating breakfast. Can you sort of expand on that a little bit? Why does eating breakfast help so much?
That's really interesting. A lot of research actually in Europe has shown that the breakfast eaters compared to non-breakfast eaters have higher levels of these gut hormones, better insulin regulation throughout the day, and tend to eat less calories later in the day too. So it's interesting because it flies in the face of the whole intermittent fasting story, right? And the fasting till breakfast. So, you know, here's what I tell people: is just figure out what works for you.
Exactly.
That's the thing. It's like the research shows this, but like we were talking about last night, we don't need the paper to tell us what really works for that person or us. We need to just try it on and see if it fits.
Yeah, and that's really something I try to talk about a lot, is that individual variability. And you know, studies may show that for breakfast eaters have better gut hormone profiling, etc., throughout the day. But some people do very well missing breakfast and are very insulin sensitive in a decent way. They feel good. I would never tell those people to start eating breakfast if they felt good doing what they're doing already.
Exactly.
I think that's key.
Hello friends, it's Michael Mutzel here with High Intensity Health. Thanks for showing up and tuning back in. I'm very excited to be in Dr. Rangan Chatterjee's home right here in Winslow. Okay, beautiful place, guys. We'll show you some B-roll footage, and you have a new book coming out, The Power of Balance.
Yeah, The Power of Balance, out in January 2018.
Super excited to talk about that. And then a new interview series where you did The Doctor in the House Part 2, Season 2.
Yeah, Season 2's come out, it's aired, it's, I think it's really shaking things up actually, certainly over this side of the pond, so very, very excited as to see how this movement grows over here. Our perception here is that certainly in America, this movement is growing quite fast, but I think well, I'm hoping we're going to catch up with you guys soon.
Yeah. When you say this movement, we're talking like functional medicine, lifestyle-based medicine.
Yeah, lifestyle-based medicine, using a functional medicine approach. Basically, the fundamental difference between acute care and chronic care. The acute care model, one bug causing an infection, give an antibiotic, kill the bug, problem goes. Unfortunately, as you well know, chronic disease doesn't really fit that neatly into that model, and I think that's why we're struggling. So, yeah, I'm excited to have the opportunity on BBC One to really showcase how many different conditions can be helped, because the first season there was a lot of type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes was only meant to feature once, but it's that prevalent in the population that actually when I went in and I did some blood tests, I diagnosed it for the first time on this new family, And I was delighted to be able to demonstrate to people that it was completely reversed in 30 days. And actually, that reversal has proved sustainable. So I left that lady's house, maybe 20 months ago now, for the final time, and her blood sugar is even better than it was when I left her. When I left her, it was at about, I think it was 5.7. It was 7.2 at the start of the series. In 30 days, we got it down to 5.7, just 30 days. And it's now 5.5. And, her GP is almost saying, well, I'm not sure you were diabetic in the first place, but we've got all the labs to prove it.
Yeah. So you were going into people's homes, okay, and using lab tests in their own environment to diagnose and then modify their lifestyle and their nutrition. That's kind of what the doctor in the house is, kind of the impetus or the premise.
Yeah, the reality is, doctor in the house, the whole idea of the show is simply this: what happens if you have more than 10 minutes with your patient? So the average consultation time in the UK with your primary care doctor is 10 minutes. I think it's very similar with you guys, maybe 15 minutes, but it's clearly not enough. And so the whole concept of the show is, what happens if you have more time? I don't think the BBC were looking for someone doing lifestyle medicine or taking a functional medicine approach. I think, it was just because I ended up getting the gig to do the show. Obviously that was the approach I was going to take, because that's what resonates with me. That's what I feel makes sense. And actually people often ask, are you a functional medicine doctor? Well, I'm a doctor who does whatever I need to do to get my patient better in as harmless a way as possible. So I use functional medicine principles, I use lifestyle medicine principles, I use things that I've learned from strength coaches like Charles Poliquin. I've studied movement mechanics, stress reduction, all these kind of things. I use whatever I need to. So I don't really define myself as, a lifestyle medicine doctor or a functional medicine doctor. I would say I've got a bigger toolbox now than I did 5 years ago, and I use whatever it takes for the patient. So I think it's just good medicine.
That's brilliant.
It's just good medicine.
Yeah, and so you've seen tens of thousands of patients we talked about kind of offline.
Yeah.
And kind of one way that you got into this type of medicine is your personal story with your son. And that was kind of how you transitioned here. So let's rewind the clock a little bit and talk about that. I think it's important for the context so people can kind of understand how important and how not to overlook common micronutrient deficiencies potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, I've been a practicing medical doctor for about 16 years now. And I've always felt that there was something missing. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I knew, someone comes in with depression, what the protocol says, put them on an antidepressant. It just didn't feel right to me. So I've always been looking and striving for something different. But really it hit home, 6.5 years ago? Our first child, he was 6 months old. My wife and I, we were on holiday in France. We were staying in a French chalet. It's a beautiful place, Chamonix. It's a place that I ski a lot. And, he was he was a bit coldy for the day. He had a bit of a cough, a bit of phlegm was coming up. And he's only 6 months old. Up until that point, he was only breastfed. So he's exclusively breastfed. And in the evening, my wife just wouldn't put him down for some reason. She just felt, mother's intuition. She just felt, I'm not putting him in his cot. So she was in front of the television in the chalet, holding him, and I was sort of putting the kettle on in the kitchen, and she called out to me basically saying, "Look, Rangan, come in, he's not moving." And I just suddenly came. I just assumed that he'd been choking on sort of maybe a thick piece of phlegm. I turned him around, he was only a little baby, and I tried to clear his airway, and nothing was happening. And the reality is I froze. I wasn't, all my years of medical training at that point didn't really mean anything, because I was just a worried dad.
The emotion kind of overrode all that.
Emotion overrode. I was just standing there thinking, what do I do? I was in a different country, and it was my wife who actually said, "Look, we just got to get to the hospital now." So we rushed into the car. It had just snowed, so I almost killed all of us by driving to at the bottom of the chalet. You turn right and it's a steep turn, and the car skidded because I was just in a panic to get to the hospital. We got there. thankfully, it was open. It was a village hospital that was just really open for another. It was closes at 8 o'clock, and we were there at about 7:45, 7:50 in the evening. Thankfully, it was open. Went into the resus. And it's all a bit of a blur. I remember them putting a neckline in. I remember them getting his fever. And his fever, there was no fever. He didn't have a fever, so we know as doctors that febrile convulsions are relatively common. But he had no fever, and you could see the doctors' faces suddenly get really worried, because suddenly this wasn't a febrile convulsion. I want to say convulsion, I should clarify. My wife tells me that he put his arms back and he went rigid. So they gave him some retodiazepam. They didn't know what was going on. He then got blue lighted down the mountain half an hour to the main centre hospital. I think he had 2 lumbar punctures that night. And then a few hours later, I got told that he had a hypocalcemic convulsion. So I think we have the same units as America, but serum calcium 2.2 to 2.6 is roughly what it should be, and his serum calcium was 0.97.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so barely compatible with any form of sort of functioning, and obviously that led to him to having a convulsion. So I was really confused, and they couldn't figure out why. I know with hindsight it's really obvious. Knowing what I know now, it's like, well, of course that was obvious, but then they told us a few hours later it was secondary to a low vitamin D. So he had a vitamin D deficiency, which had presumably been building up for a long period of time, and his calcium was dropping and dropping and dropping, and then it sort of reached that sort of critical point where he had a convulsion. So we were there for 4 nights, and it was probably the most worrying few days of our life. And what I couldn't really fathom afterwards is, how did I not know about this? How did that happen to my son? We were a health conscious family. I've done my specialist training. I'm sort of a member of the Royal College of Physicians, which is our internal medical examinations. I did all that. Then I moved to general practice because I wanted a more rounded approach than I felt I was getting as a physician. I thought, and I did all my exams and that. I thought, well, how can I sort of be a qualified specialist, qualified GP, yet my son nearly dies from a preventable vitamin deficiency? That was hard to take. It still is very hard to take. But really, that's why I'm here doing what I'm doing today, because that drove me to literally spend 4 to 5 hours a night just trawling research on the internet. The more I would read, the more I would understand, the more I learned, the more I thought, hold on a minute, they've kind of corrected his vitamin D and calcium with a drip. But what about the implications that his immune system would have faced by having suboptimal vitamin D levels while it's developing? What about that? No one's told me about that. He had bad eczema, allergies. I was thinking, well, hold on a minute, of course he's got them, because that makes sense, because it's such a critical nutrient. But we missed that whole piece out, and I was determined to get him back to the state as if he had never had a convulsion. Right? People might think that's unachievable, right? I'm an eternal optimist. I'm convinced it's possible. I think I'm almost there. He's going to be, 7 years old, thriving, doing really, really well. But the more I learned, the more I studied, the more I couldn't really rationalize how come I was learning all this science that I wasn't applying with my patients. It just didn't make sense. So, my motivation was getting my son better, but really it's the same principles that got him better that are now enabling me to help so many patients in a way that I never could before. And I'll tell you, Mike, what's really striking is that about 4 weeks before this happened, I had started to become aware of vitamin D deficiency. I was thinking, I wonder whether my boy should be on vitamin D drops. Now we're always, now looking back, why didn't I just sort it out myself, right? But we're always told as medical doctors, do not prescribe for your family. It's bad practice. It should always be done by another physician. Okay, they're really quite big on it here in the UK.
Even with nutrition. No, not just medicines, but nutrition too, right?
Yeah, anything really. Now Now, I could have just bought some vitamin D drops and given it to him, right? I could have done. But I didn't. And I printed off a protocol. My wife went to see her doctor. I was at work, and she went in with my little boy and said, you know, my husband's a doctor. He's just saying, I wonder whether my son should be on vitamin D drops. And he basically said, you could have printed this out at work. He doesn't need anything. It's a load of nonsense. It's really frustrating because ultimately I could have done something. Had I known what I knew now, this would never have happened. Never have happened. But you know, rickets is on the rise in the UK.
Interesting.
It's, you know, what we 2017, rickets is on the rise. It is absolutely pathetic. And I think vitamin D deficiency, it's kind of old news in the functional medicine world, but I have, on this new series, a couple of the stories that were never covered. 2 families had gross vitamin D deficiency. You know, bone pains for 30 years, right? Being under pain specialists. And all it was vitamin D deficiency. Within 2 weeks of replacing it, all the pains went. And, you know, unfortunately that story didn't make the final edit of the show. I guess it's a bit too simple, really. Vitamin D deficiency, you give vitamin D, correct it, end of problem. Yeah, it's not
very expensive.
Yeah, so I'm really, it kind of irritates me that as a profession it's not more known about. And I'm talking about the conventional medical profession. And I told a friend of a friend that his charge should be on vitamin D drops. And they ignored me. And you know, a year later, his son got diagnosed with rickets. And it pains me because clearly he didn't mean to ignore me, so his son would end up getting rickets. It's just not well known. Yeah. And so that was the first real lesson to me, that a micronutrient deficiency can have such profound implications. So yeah, I guess I need to really thank my son, because if he didn't really go through that, I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, that doesn't make me feel any better about it. But
right. Yeah, that inner sense of guilt, because you know you could have known better, and yeah. But yeah, sometimes we all need a little story like that, or someone in our family. And I know a lot of practitioners like Mark Hyman and others, right? They get into this from their own personal issues that maybe they glossed over or were not taught in medical school. So pretty powerful for folks that don't really understand. You mentioned low serum calcium and then the connection between low vitamin D. Just a little backstory. How does that affect? Like, what does vitamin D do, and how does that relate to calcium?
Yeah. So look, vitamin D is, you know, it's a pro-hormone, really. I mean, it's called a vitamin, but actually it works like a hormone. And I think vitamin D does so many different things. You know, there's a cell receptor to vitamin D. You know, and every cell around the body has got vitamin D receptors. It's so critical. But I think the important thing regarding the story I just told is that people talk about calcium a lot. Everyone knows, you know, I need to get calcium in my diet. But the thing is, if you don't have any vitamin D, you can take in as much calcium as you want, but the calcium won't go into the right place. Mm. So very simplistically, my son would have been low in vitamin D, so despite him getting calcium through his diet, despite him getting his mother's breast milk, actually that calcium wasn't going in the right place. It was just going lower and lower and lower. And his bones, you know, we could see it on the X-ray. You know, he had rickets.
Interesting.
You know, so he had issues with his bone formation. So, in answer to your question, vitamin D does many things. You know, it helps the enhancement of the immune system. It helps your immune system develop. You know, there's receptors in the small intestine that help. You know, vitamin A and vitamin D in the small intestine, they compete for the same receptor, which can help interact with the lymphocyte proliferation afterwards. It does so many different things, but very simply, take all the calcium you want, but if you ain't got any vitamin D, it ain't going to go in the right place.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, I love that aspect, and a mutual friend of ours, Mike Ash, really talks about kind of the immune tolerance and how vitamin D, vitamin A play a huge role there. There's so much adult autoimmunity with Hashimoto's and lupus and all that sort of thing. So really fascinating stuff. Let's go back a little bit. I love the story, but I think what's really interesting, I stay in a lot of Airbnbs, so I go into people's homes, not as a doctor obviously, but I like to snoop around and see, like, you know, what's in the fridge, what's in the cupboards, what kind of soaps and, you know, fragrant-based, like, cleansing products. What were some of the things, so regardless of, I mean, I guess we can get more specific for fibromyalgia or depression, but were there global things where you go into someone's home and you go, okay guys, we need to get rid of all this stuff? Was it the processed food? Was that the culprit? Was it the cleaning products? Like, what are some high hit rate things people listening right now that realize that their lifestyle is impacting their biology in a profound way, what would you do in their home first thing?
Yeah, so I've had the luxury of going into people's houses as part of this BBC One documentary series. So I literally see everything, what's going on. It's not what they tell me in my surgery or my consultation room. I'm actually seeing, they can't really hide. Yeah. And without fail, it's processed food. Every single house I went to, even the ones who were health conscious, had cupboards full of processed food, had cupboards full of junk, and they did not realise the impact that was having on their health. Again, I'm always keen to emphasise, and Mike, just before we went online, we were talking about this, that I think many of us in this kind of lifestyle medicine community, we think some of this is old news now because, we've been talking about this for a few years. When you leave your sort of sheltered social media community where everyone knows this stuff, and you step outside that, this is still new information for people. Processed food was in every single person's cupboard. And processed food was basically what I took out for everyone. But I also explained to them what it was doing to them, how it was doing it, and why it was important. So whether it was someone with fibromyalgia, whether it was someone with depression, whether it was someone with type 2 diabetes, I was still taking the processed food out. And I think mine for me is that what these guys didn't realise is the impact that processed food was having on their health. I think people think it's about sugar and calories still, or it's just about sugar and calories. But there really wasn't this understanding of how the quality of food is impacting them. So I tell you one of the examples that someone had a 20-year history of panic attacks and high levels of anxiety, and really was unable to travel to work by herself, panic attacks on the bus, the teenage kids had to look after her. Simply by changing her diet, we had a dramatic reduction in her symptoms, and nobody had ever spoken to her about that before. She'd been to primary care doctors, she'd been referred out to secondary care. Nobody had ever mentioned to her that changing her diet would affect her mood. And I find that in 2017, I find it striking. It's unacceptable. As far as I'm concerned, it's completely unacceptable. It's well known now, the link between food and mood. Very well known, the two-way axis between gut and brain. And once I explained it to her, she was on board, right? We've got to take the time to explain to them, but she was slim, right? There was no weight issue. I said, no, this is not about your weight, it's about your brain. It wasn't the whole story, right? But it got her in a much better place that then I could access some sort of emotional help for her. So she was resistant at the start because she didn't know why. Once I explained to her why, and once she tried it for a few days, it got addictive. A few months on now, she's a fantastic chef. She was having takeaway every night, and she is now addicted to cooking. And she said, "Thank you, I've fallen in love with food again." And it amazes me all the time how just changing your diet can have such a profound impact.
That's really powerful. So what I infer from that, it wasn't like that she was lazy. It was just the awareness and that connection between understanding that food makes an impact on other systemic, not just body composition, but mood and so forth. So that's what I wanted to kind of, because I know you're big into behavior change. So what you found with, seeing many, many patients and then going into the homes of these individuals is that they just need the knowledge.
They need the knowledge.
That's what it is.
Mike, that's what's missing. It's very easy for us to say as a profession that, our patients don't listen. Really? I would challenge that. I would say our job as healthcare professionals is to explain it in such a way, in a language that they understand so that they will listen. Right? That's my job as a doctor. I take it really seriously that every patient who walks out understands why I'm asking them to make that change. Right? If you spend 20 seconds on it and then patients don't do it, if you say, you've got a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, try for a couple of months, see if you can lose some weight, do a bit more exercise and come back. That ain't good enough anymore. You need to tell them what that exercise is, how many times you want them to do, what difficulties they have in their life, what are the obstacles, how can we find time for you, how can we come up with inventive ways where you can fit it into your life. Food, what changes? What does a healthy diet mean? It means nothing, right? It means 10 different things to 10 different people. I strongly believe that the main skill of a healthcare practitioner is an ability to communicate with the patient in front of you. For me, that beats the science any day of the week. And the reason it does is because you can know all the science, but if you can't convert that into a meaningful interaction with your patient, nothing is going to change. And, you know, it's funny, 16 years of seeing patients, the more experience I get, the more patients I see, the more I think it comes down to the doctor-patient relationship. And yes, I had a lot of time with these guys, but even in my clinic, I can, by and large, convince my patients to make change, not because I'm telling them to, because I'll explain to them why it matters. Then they want to do it. That's no longer them walking out, oh, doctor says I've got to do this, I've got to go to the gym. No, that's like, oh, I get it now. That's why I'm in this position. Right, I'm going to make these changes. So I've changed my view. I think we need to explain it. We need to know what language to use with the right patient to get them to make those changes. And that's the biggest skill, and that's missing from a lot of healthcare professionals.
Mm-hmm. And we were talking offline that this whole functional medicine journey for you has almost been paired with or paralleled with like a personal development journey. So I'm wondering if that level of awareness and consciousness, if that's not even there or emphasized in traditional medicine in the sense, like when we go to functional medicine meetings, we talk about empathy and emotional intelligence and being present and mindful within that. So is that lacking in traditional medicine? Is that kind of why, you know, patients maybe aren't, or another thing just popped in my head and started to shift gears, or is it that because you do walk the walk, you're physically fit, you're lean, you know, you eat healthy, you're clean, some traditional doctors don't really walk the walk, so maybe the patient's not really buying that exercise more, eat better kind of thing.
Yeah, I remember, I've got a very clear memory of the very first family I ever did on Doctor in the House, and it was the first series, and it was the diabetic family, the type of diabetes that I managed to reverse. And her husband, I remember, we were filming all day and they were watching me, and you know, he was overweight, he'd really let himself go for a few years, he used to be a fit and active fireman and things had gone downhill. And I said to him, look, I think we've got to make these changes, and I explained to him why. And he said, Doc, you know what? I'm going to listen to you. I said, okay, great. And he goes, I've watched you, I've been observing you, I've noticed everything you pick up, you're flipping the back, just seeing what's in it. You seem to me to be walking the walk, and that's why I'm going to listen to you. So for him, he'd heard stuff before, but he had faith in me because of him watching me do the things I was asking him to do. And I'm really proud to say that any intervention I recommend to a patient is something that I've tried myself or I continuously do. So I think that's really important. And I do think, I don't think, Mike, you know, I've been watching and listening to your podcast for years, and I think it's fantastic. And for me, I think pretty much all of your guests, or the vast majority, are probably in good shape. You know, they probably, you know, are into nutrition, are into physical movements, are into, you know, prioritizing sleep. You know, and I don't think that's by accident, because I think once you understand the power of lifestyle in terms of what it does to your biology, I think the natural extension is to live and breathe it. And then when you do it, you can say it with a lot more conviction to your patient because you've been there. You know, if you're asking them to go on an elimination diet, if you've been there and done it, you know the problems, you can go through them with them. And it was quite interesting to me, 2 or 3 years back, you know, obviously the movement, the low carb movement is, you know, is gaining popularity all the time. But what was quite striking for me, even between the first series and the second series, so maybe 2 years ago, it was still quite niche. It's getting less niche now because more and more doctors, they're trying it themselves. And when they do it themselves and they notice, oh, my belly's going in a little bit quite quickly, you know, they're much more likely to recommend it once they've been through it. I'm seeing that over and over again, that a doctor who's tried something, it's worked for them, they then recommend those interventions. And I'm the same, you know, if I've done something, I then have a personal bias, which I try and take out of the equation, but ultimately we're all human, aren't we? We do have personal biases based on what we've experienced ourselves. How's that going to help us patients? And so I think it's really important, if you expect your patient to take something seriously, you've got to try and walk the walk as much as possible. And, you know, I think it's hard because I don't know what it's like for you guys in the States, but we've got the National Health Service here. this is the largest employer, certainly in the UK. I think maybe in Europe, it's I think it's over 1 million employees, and this is the free healthcare that everyone has access to in the UK. 53% of National Health Service employees are either overweight or obese. So I think we need to just take a step back and think about that for a second and go, okay, the group of people who, by and large, are responsible for looking after the population, over half of them are unable to control their own weight. I shouldn't use the word control your own weight, actually, because I don't think it's a personal responsibility issue. I think it's endemic of our lack of education around this and the fact that society and our environment is toxic. And therefore, despite people's best efforts, either they're doing the wrong thing or they're not able to do what they need to do. So most of our NHS employees are overweight. So how are we going to make a difference with patients when that's the case? And the environment is key here, because I used to work in a practice in a place called Oldham, and that's a very, large parts of Oldham are socially deprived. A lot of people are on social security and benefits. One of the most rewarding experiences of my life working there. I really got on well with the patients for 7 years. But what was striking for me is if I ever forgot to bring my lunch with me, I could not get a healthy lunch within a mile radius of the surgery. So I remember sometimes at lunchtime I'd go out, I'm going to go buy something. You would get chicken kebab and fries, burger and fries. It was really cheap as well. And that's when I really figured out that I can give these guys the best advice that I can in my consultation, but they're going to walk out into an environment where it is simply impossible for them to carry that out. And I think that's also the big elephant in the room sometimes, is that, as a society, being unhealthy is the default option for many. And we've got to change that. If we're really serious about changing it, individual practitioners can help patients, sure, but you've got to change the environment. You've got to design the environment so that health becomes the default option. You've noticed walking in this house, it's not the same thing, but there's exercise stuff everywhere. I keep it around me because, yes, it might drive my wife a bit insane sometimes, but I know if it's there, I'm going to do a quick 5 minutes here, a quick 10 minutes there, and I really do try and design my environment so that I am active. And I know it's very challenging for people, but I think it's important to walk the walk.
But what's important about that, the takeaway is you have to be very intentional about this, right? So to construct your environment, and I want to go back a little bit to behavior, and then I want to finish off on the carb stuff is awesome. But to go back to the behavior, one thing that I advise my clients to do is kind of make the private public. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to have a salad, if you're new to eating real food, right? You eat junk food, chicken nuggets, kebabs, like you mentioned. If you're going to have a salad, post a picture on Instagram or Facebook, like, hey, here's my lunch today. And that kind of causes you to then make more congruent decisions later on throughout the day. And it seems to work. And so, like, people like you and I, we naturally post health stuff. So then if we were to go smoke a cigarette, we'd feel this cognitive dissonance, right?
Absolutely.
Any behavior tips that you like to recommend to people?
The biggest behavior tip for me is control the environment you can control. Okay, I probably say that at the end of every consultation. What I mean by that is simply this. Let's take food for example. If you keep foods in your house that you don't want to be consuming, forget it. You will crack at some point, right? You will crack. I remember maybe just a few weeks ago, we were sitting here on the sofa, my wife and I were just chilling out in the evening. Work had been super stressful. I was craving something, I wasn't craving a piece of fruit. I wasn't craving anything else. I was craving something sweet and sugary. And we went through the cupboards. There's nothing there. Right? There's nothing there. So you give it 10 minutes and then you go, forget it.
The thought passes.
The thought passes. And I think it's really important because you step out your front door, you've got to be using willpower. Everywhere out there now, you have to use willpower. You just travelled here, right? You've been in airports. You're tired, you're probably jet lagged. You're probably being challenged or tempted over and over again. That's when people crack, right? I'm not saying to people you can never have something you like. I'm just saying have it outside. Have it when you're out in a cafe with your friends. If you want something, have it there. Don't keep it in here because you will crack. So my number one tip for people when they're trying to make change is get it out of the house. Right. And literally, I'd probably say that's the most important thing for me. Don't keep it in here.
And that's not just food, like TV in the bedroom, maybe, or the phone right next to the nightstand. Like, let's talk about that, because I think that's been a big, thanks to Dallas Hartwig and others, we've been talking about technology and how this is kind of forcing like social isolation within our own home because we're on these devices. So what do you do with your phone now instead of you do something about it, right?
Yeah, I do, absolutely. And so before I answer this, I've got to acknowledge that I'm as guilty as being tempted by this stuff as the next guy. Okay, I'm not perfect, but we implemented a rule that at around 8:30 in the evening, our phones tend to go off. I'm not going to say 100% of the time. We try for 100%, we may hit it 78% of the time. My phone chargers live downstairs, right? They're not, we almost don't allow them upstairs. So often when we go to bed, we'll leave it on charge downstairs. It won't come into the bedroom. If my charger's in the bedroom, if my phone gets in there in the evening, that's it.
It's over.
It's over. I will be.
Power at the end of the day. You don't have much. Yeah.
I will just. I'll just.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Yeah. And then half an hour later, you're still. You've got involved in a debate on Twitter or something. So I keep it out of the bedroom. We've been really intentional about our use of light recently. The more I study about light and its impact, light, I think, is more powerful than any drug we have. It influences our hormones, it changes our biology, and I think all these things, when you look at life through an evolutionary lens, it suddenly just makes so much sense. We've sort of evolved around the sun, haven't we? And before, when the sun would go down, that would be what I call in my book the campfire hours. That time to sort of chill out, relax. Dim lighting or just the candle light. In the evening, if we put on candlelight, it just feels different. You feel chilled, you feel relaxed. If we have the bright LED lights on in the kitchen, it almost feels obnoxious in the evening. So we're very careful with our use of light in the evening. And I'll tell you actually one thing that happened about 2 months ago, right? My kids have always been early risers. And what we did, I was sort of reading all this, and actually it's longer than 2 months ago, I was reading all the stuff about different lights. And the kids want a night light, they were used to a night light, so I bought a red one. Okay, we put it on. The first morning, we had to literally wake them. It was about an hour and a half after they normally would wake up. They were still deep in sleep. That continued for about a week. Then it eased off, but we're probably getting another half hour, another 30 minutes, I reckon, of their sleep now that they've got a red light that's their night light, as opposed to, I can't remember what it was before, just a standard sort of white light.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, when you understand what light does, it shouldn't actually surprise us, but it does. So that's quite a big change. So you see, we've obviously got the salt lamp in here.
Yeah,
we keep that. Sometimes we're in here just relaxing in the evening. Often we'll do some sort of yoga or some stretching. We might put a couple of candles on and just really sit and chat here. And I find when I do that, I sleep really well. When I don't, I really struggle. And, this is really kind of what my book is about, Mike. It's called The Power of Balance. And I have really split up the 4 pillars of health, or what I regard as the 4 pillars of health, eating well, moving well, sleeping well, and relaxing well. And I've given each pillar equal importance. And I'm telling people, or I'm suggesting to people, that you don't need to be perfect in one area, but you've got to pay attention to each area. And it's such a simple framework. But when I see patients who are complicated with these chronic health conditions that have been going on for years, and it's hard to figure out where to start, I will take a step back and I will go, which of these 4 pillars are these guys most deficient in? And that's where I start. And I'm finding, there's a certain beauty and simplicity. And I'm finding the more patients I see, it comes down a lot of the times to those 4 things. And so, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I thought it was all nutrition. Right? I thought, change your diet, change everything. And I've totally changed my view. I think food is important. For many, it's the most critical part of the piece. But for many, it isn't. I have a lot of diabetic patients who come in to see me, and they've been on a low-carb diet you know what, they can't get their A1Cs down. And it becomes quite clear from talking to them, guys, your diet's good enough, it ain't your diet. There's something else going on here. You're not sleeping. You're chronically on. From the minute you get up to the minute you go to bed, you are wired. It's stress that's driving this. You know, when you explain them that, you know, a night of sleep deprivation will raise levels of catecholamines, will change HPA axis sort of hormones like cortisol, will increase your reactive oxygen species, will change levels of adiponectin and leptin, you know, and change things like IL-6, TNF-alpha. When you explain to patients that that's what sleep does, sleep deprivation does, it's, you know, you know, some patients need it explained in a different way, but that is a profound impact on your biology from one night sleep deprivation. So maybe the focus has got to be on, let's think about going to bed 1 hour earlier. And I've got one patient, right, and it's quite a recent patient. That's how we got her A1C down. I didn't touch her diet. I said, your diet's fine. In fact, you can probably ease off a little bit if you want. I think your diet is good enough. Let's focus on getting to sleep earlier. Let's focus on getting you switching off for at least 10 minutes a day. And the thing about switching off and meditation, meditation, the term scares people, a lot of people. So I talk about a practice of stillness. I say, for 10 minutes a day, I want you to find some form of stillness practice that works for you. If that's meditation, great. If it's sitting there with your favourite piece of music on and you're listening to every beat, every word, I'm cool with that, as long as you're not scrolling Facebook at the same time, right? It's something where you just say stop. And I know from my, you know, that's probably the area I struggle with the most. You know, my diet is pretty much dialed in, I'd say 99% of the time. It's just because I've always prioritised that. I'm pretty good at being physically active. I tend to prioritise getting to sleep early. I really do, particularly the last couple of years. But I struggle sometimes with my switch off and my co-op. But you know, the start of this year, I remember the first 6 weeks of this year, I meditated every single day for 10 to 20 minutes. I felt great. You know, I felt amazing. And then I totally fell off the cliff.
We've been filming a lot. You've been writing the book, and there's a lot of other things.
Yeah, no, I get it. So I'm not beating myself up, and that's the point. And actually, what I try and sort of cover in the book is that this threshold that we have is constantly moving, right? Life is not static. There's no perfect or imperfect. You know, what works now may not work next week. And the book really is meant to be a roadmap for people that they can sort of access throughout the year if they need to, you know, use it to get back on track. If you slip off, that's okay. You know, work stress gets in the way, family stuff comes up, I get it, but it's constantly moving. And I do like the concept of personal thresholds, because I think we all have one. And how I often explain chronic problems to my patients are, you've got a threshold, right? This didn't just happen when you started getting symptoms. You have been getting closer and closer to that threshold maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, you know, stress when you were a kid, you know, work stress, nutritional stress, you know, being chained to a desk for 8 or 9 hours a day, right? It all mounts up, and then maybe something trivial tips you over. But that's maybe not the main problem. That's just the last thing. It's like juggling balls, 3 balls, 4 balls, 5 balls. You throw a 6th ball in, all the balls fall down. But at that point, you've got to go back and rebuild from scratch. So I think that concept is quite useful for patients to try and kind of figure out that, you know, what is my personal threshold? So yeah, that's kind of what I talk about a lot these days, this concept of thresholds.
Yeah, and so there's some introspection so they can kind of evaluate their own life and try and put the pieces of the puzzle together.
Yeah, because it's never, Mike, for me, it's never been about telling a patient what to do. I've never told a patient that they must give up smoking. I don't think it's my role. My role is, if they ask me for an opinion, my job, I believe, is to educate them and empower them with that information and let them know what that is doing to them. If at the end of that conversation, I feel that they've understood it and they say, yeah, but you know what, Doc? I love it. I get so much enjoyment out of it. I'm not saying I condone it or endorse it, but I'm saying, ultimately, I don't want to tell a patient what to do. I want to give them the information, the knowledge that they then want to make that change. And that's really what I do. And I'd like to think that's why I've managed to get through to most of my patients, because that's the approach I take. And the book is absolutely not about telling people what to do. It's about showing them a roadmap and saying, look, these are my thoughts. You know, I want them to own it. I don't want them to do a 10-day diet or a 21-day diet because I told them to. No, because they'll rebound from that. I want them to own it so they understand going forward how to look after themselves.
And how to personalize it to their own lifestyle and their needs, which is really key.
Yeah.
And one of those things that comes up is carbohydrates, literally. You know, because we do hammer carbohydrates, low carb. I'm guilty of this as anyone. But there's many people that enjoy their carbohydrates and cover other areas of their life, like the stress, the community, sleep, and all that, and seem to do really well with it. So you had a beautiful kind of analogy or kind of a way to help us better understand this complexity here.
Yeah, Mike, I'm glad you asked that, because this is something that I've wrestled with for so many months and years. You know, a few years ago, I thought, yeah, this low carb, the insulin story, it really makes sense to me, and I started implementing it. I started getting great results, particularly with patients with insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes. But I thought, as if we're scientists, if we're doctors, if we're healers, whatever you want to call us, we have to be able to explain that there are communities around the world which are seemingly doing very well with high carb diets. The Okinawa in Japan is a classic example. From what I've read, it seems 70-80% of their diet may be from carbohydrates. Now, it so happens that these carbohydrates tend to be the cellular carbohydrates, what I would call the healthy carbohydrates, like their sweet potatoes. I also appreciate that this is a community who is generally physically active, sleeps pretty well, has a lot of community and social connection. So I think it's very hard to isolate that, they're on a high carb diet, so a high carb diet must work for everyone. There's no question in the West, a lot of the patients that I see seem to do well quite quickly when they cut out their refined and processed carbohydrates. But I've always wrestled with why can it be that some people follow a vegan diet and some people actually do well? It's not necessarily something I recommend to my patients, but if a person's coming in and they're doing well, I've got to accept that. I can't ignore that because it doesn't fit into the way I view things. I've got to go, okay, well, why is that? And really, I've had an interest in the microbiome for years, and you mentioned Michael Ash before. Michael's really been my mentor and really pretty much taught me everything I know about the microbiome. And I think that's the key to why all these seemingly different diets, like a high good carb diet in Japan may work, whereas a low carb diet here may also work. Maybe it's to do with inflammation mediated through the microbiome. Because in the West now, as trans fats have gone out of, by and large, they've gone out of the food environment, or certainly a lot lower than it used to be. I think processed and refined carbohydrates are the most inflammatory foods that are available. So maybe when people go on a low carb diet, maybe what's happening is because most of the carbs that people are eating today are crappy, right, and are pro-inflammatory, maybe some of the benefit is the fact that they're switching off inflammation rather than it being carbohydrates per se. And I personally never use the term low carb. The reason I don't use it is it's not that I don't subscribe to a lot of the views of the low carb movement. It's not that at all. It's more that we've demonized fat unfairly for 40 years, 50 years. Yeah. Well, I really feel strongly that we shouldn't do the same thing to carbohydrates, because I think it then gets very easy to criticize. So what about these populations? You're talking about low carb, but these guys are eating loads of carbs. I think we have to be able to explain that. I think that in the West, we're chronically sleep deprived. We're stressed out. We're not moving much. In the context, and all these things drive insulin resistance, right? So in the context of that, maybe that's why low carb diets tend to work so quickly and effectively for so many in the West. Maybe. But I'm not saying I have the answer. I'm open-minded to it, but I think that's part of the story. And I think if you're optimizing other things, like your sleep quality, like your physical activity, meditation and switch off, if you're optimizing those things, maybe you can get away with more carbs, particularly if it's the right kind of carbs. And I try and cover this in my book a little bit. I really try and cover why are seemingly different diets working so well for different groups of people. The other thing we have to be aware of is that our microbiomes are different in different parts of the world. You know, maybe, and I don't know the answer here, but maybe the Okinawans have a very robust, you know, diverse, rich microbiome rather than the sort of decimated microbiomes some of us may have. Maybe that's why they can tolerate more carbohydrates. I don't think there's one right answer. I think, you know, there's so many factors, so many inputs as to why people do better on different diets. You know, a lot of my patients don't do well on low carb diets. They don't. I put them on moderate carb diets. So I'm a big proponent of things like sweet potatoes, butternut squash. I think these things can have a profoundly positive impact on the microbiome. But I do use low carb diets as well. But, you know, take type 2 diabetes, right? Classic example of, you know, a condition of relative carbohydrate intolerance where restricted amounts of carbohydrates may work very well. I try and do that in the short term because, you know, I always say that diabetes or type 2 diabetes is not a blood sugar problem. There's a problem with blood sugar in type 2 diabetes, but it's not a blood sugar problem because the blood sugar being elevated is the final piece of the picture. You know, this has been going on for years. Your body has done everything it can, pushing out insulin, doing all things it can to keep your sugar under control. By the time you get the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, this has been going on for a long period of time, right? So yeah, at that point, you've got a form of carbohydrate intolerance. So I will restrict, particularly refined and processed carbohydrates at that time. But then I'll try and figure out what drove them there. Is it dysbiosis in their gut? Because if I can treat the dysbiosis, get rid of lipopolysaccharide transfer, and so lipopolysaccharide, as you know, Mike, is what's found in gram-negative bacteria on their cell wall. Fine if it stays within the gut, but if it comes through and gets into your blood, it can be, you know, it's a potent stimulator of the immune system and can drive inflammation. So maybe if you fix the dysbiosis, stop the LPS transferring into the systemic circulation, maybe at that point, you know, you don't need to be so restricted with your carbs. And I'm finding that more and more that I use it as a short-term intervention. Some people it stays long-term, but some people can then bring in, you know, more and more carbs. And I'm probably an example of that. You know, I can eat quite a lot of carbs now, particularly things like sweet potatoes and even white potatoes, right? And it doesn't seem to do anything for my circumference, but my microbiome, my gut, is in a much better position than it was 3 years ago. 3 years ago, I had antibodies to lipopolysaccharide. I don't anymore.
Really?
So I always try and learn from my own experience, learn from my patients, you know. And a friend of mine, she's a kidney consultant, so she's a conventional medic, but she got diagnosed with pre-diabetes, and it was all stress-induced. Wow. So she didn't change her diet, she just recalibrated the stress in her life, and she was no longer pre-diabetic. Right? And that really echoes what I saw you put on Facebook recently, which is, you know, everyone thinks type 2 diabetes is all about carbs. It ain't, right? It's a big part of the picture, but if you're hammering the low carbness and people are still not getting better, you know what, you've got to look somewhere else. And that's really an evolution for me from where I was a few years ago to where I am now. And I'm sure if you interview me in 5 years' time, I'll probably be telling you it will change again.
Yeah.
So was that useful in trying to sort of...
That was absolutely brilliant. And just to kind of reinforce one of the things you talked about, the bacterial endotoxin with the lipopolysaccharide. So let's paint a picture where if someone does not do the gut work, and let's say part of the reason why they may have insulin resistance is due to this imbalance of this gram-negative bacteria, and they start eating the traditional low-carb diet, bacon, butter, a lot of meats, what's going to happen?
Well, that can be a very toxic mix if you have got, you know, increased intestinal permeability, so a leaky gut. You know, at that point, if you have a toxic mix of sort of, you know, things like bacon and butter, you know, the high-fat diet at that point can be quite problematic potentially, and it's, I think, this could be, you know, I was recently involved in a Twitter conversation about this, and many of us are feeling that could be when high-fat diets don't work so well, because if you've already got a breached intestinal border, actually fat at that point might be problematic. I think it gets so delicate. What I would say is, where I think a low-carb approach is so beneficial is it's very simple to understand for people. Okay, so it's not a complex area for people, for the general public to get and implement. It's actually quite straightforward, and obviously, a lot of people don't feel that hungry on a low carb diet, so they find it easier to stick to. But I think it's so nuanced that a lot of people can do it wrong. I've seen so many low carbers, having quite unhealthy diets, but it's okay because there ain't no carbs in it. Mm-hmm. And I think the missing part of the picture, it's the quality of your food really matters. And even at the low carb, I was there last year at Low Carb Vale. Quite a few people are walking around with sort of
diet sodas.
Yeah, and all kinds of stuff. It ain't all about carbs. There's the quality of the carbs plays a big role. So yeah, I think there's so many pieces of the puzzle, and that's what I try to really cover in my TED Talk. I really try to cover that. Look, we've got sort of some common root causes that drive so many different conditions, and actually we go back to basics, strip it all back, and try and just tackle those root causes. Food, movement, sleep, relaxation, gut health, environmental toxins, sunlight. You know what? It's amazing how many downstream things kind of take care of themselves. Yeah. And it never ceases to amaze me how many things get better when you get those basics right.
Absolutely. Yeah, very, very powerful stuff. So a few final questions here, but do we cover everything that about your book? We talked about the book and then the BBC show and so forth. Just want to make sure we have like 3 or 4 final questions we have to ask every guest in the show to kind of get to know you, Dr. Chatterjee, more on a personal level. But anything that you wanted to share that we didn't really get to address?
No, really, perhaps to be guided by you, really. Yeah, for me, the key thing I love to get across to patients is good health is not as hard as you think it is. There is this misconception, I believe, that you've either got to make a choice. You can either enjoy your life or you can be healthy. And it's just simply not the case. And I want to help show people one-on-one in my consultation room, but also through the medium that I'm very fortunate to have on BBC television, is to show people that actually it's not as difficult as you think it is. Make one change this week, run it for 1 week, right? See how you feel. I love the 10,000 steps a day, right? Is there any science to support 10,000 steps? Not that I can see. Do I still think it's a good recommendation? Absolutely. I don't need a paper to tell me that, right? I see it time and time again. And I think with wearables now, it's never been easier. Since I was writing the book, right, and it's one of the interventions in there that I sort of suggest to people. It's interesting that I would come back from writing and I'd chat to my wife and I'd talk to her about it. She now has changed what she does day in, day out to hit 10,000 steps just from me, opening up on her phone and saying, oh, look, babe, I can see, you've only done this many steps a day. And now she will purposely change what she does because it's trackable. It's easy to achieve for a lot of people, or at least it's easy to measure. And I find that a really powerful intervention. I say, look, start there. I did this thing on Facebook last week, Mike, right? I posted about physical inactivity. The British Heart Foundation had done some study, and they came up with the conclusion that 20 million Brits were not meeting Public Health England's guidelines for physical activity. So technically we're physically inactive. And I posted it, and a lot of people came on my wall and were sort of saying, it's not about movement, it's about food. It's not about movement, it's about food. And I was like, it's clearly quite a sensitive area, because I would agree for weight loss, I agree that I tend to get more benefit when people change their diet than when they start to be more active. Okay. But we have to also recognise that physical activity, physical inactivity is the 5th leading cause of mortality around the world. I think the World Health Organization have published that recently. So there's many other benefits from physical activity, or sort of, there's many other benefits when people get more active. And I think what I was just sort of trying to illustrate about what happened on Facebook recently was purely that there's so many polarized opinions. This is the way to do it. No, this is the way to do it. No, it's got to be low carb. No, that's a load of rubbish. It's got to be this. It's like, hey, wait a minute, guys. Let's take a step back. we've all got our personal biases. If you have done a low carb diet that's worked for you, you know what? You're going to be a little bit more biased, I think, without realizing it when you're with your patients. You're going to think, you know what? I kind of know that works. I've been there, right? And I probably still have my personal biases with patients, but I think it's really important that we try and recognize there are different ways, and you have to listen to the person in front of you, and if something is working for them, it's working. Yeah. Whether it fits your ideology or not, but it's working for them, it's working. And the other thing with behavior change, Mike, is it's really about trying to find something that's achievable for that person. So let's say 10,000 steps, right? And it's kind of, why don't you try that for a week, right? Why don't you see how you go? Nothing else. Don't change anything else at all. So maybe how many times that becomes a gateway for them where they're moving more. So by virtue of doing 10,000 steps, most of them are not sitting down by a desk all day. They're getting up more to try and get that movement in. They feel better. Then that means they want to eat healthier. Or that means they might want to say, well, what else can I do? I feel like being a bit more active now. Is there anything else I can do, Doc? And some people can do the whole hog. You know, I'm a all-in kind of guy. You know, if I'm making changes, you know what? I go all in. I can be quite extreme like that, but I've recognised that many of my patients don't respond well to that, and you need to take it slow.
Yeah, some people just small little baby steps. Other people it's a sweeping lifestyle change, and it compounds, like you're talking about. Yeah. Great. There's a great book, The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy, where he talks about that, where these small little steps can then compound over time. Yeah, which is absolutely beautiful. But just a little side note. So I was a personal trainer before I got a master's in nutrition. I rarely saw people lose a lot of weight with just diet alone. You know, if we're talking about just so I think they're like you're talking about, like the naysayers are saying, oh, it's all about diet. It's all about all the pieces. Like that's one sliver. I think
that's one. Yeah.
So really, really important stuff, and there's some good research to support that. So it's diet, exercise, stress reduction, sleep. The whole thing comes together, which we talked about. And we talked about how you try to minimize your personal bias when working with patients, but now we want to kind of see your personal bias.
Okay.
If there was one exercise you just couldn't live without, a form of exercise, maybe it's a type, but yoga, weightlifting, kind of the primal movements, what would that be and why?
That's a good question. What one exercise could I not live without? Well, I think it's probably going to be a form of glute exercise. Okay, and so I think as a generation, I think as a society, we've got sleepy butt muscles, basically, okay? Everyone's stressed about how their butts look, but I think there's quite a serious problem underpinning that. I think that our glute muscles are a keystone muscle in our body, and if they're not firing properly, I think lots of other things, including your back, take the strain off that. And so I do every single day, I do a little thing on a step, where I'm sort of doing, I should have shown you actually, I could have shown you.
We'll do it after and weave it in.
Yeah, okay. So it's that glute exercise that this chap Gary Ward taught me, and I love it. It really helps me activate my glutes, and it has been life-changing. It's really helped me get rid of my backache. So for me, I always kind of try and do that in the morning, like when my coffee's on, I'll just probably knock out a minute on the step, just to sort of fire up my glutes for the day. I love lunges, I love just anything that doesn't require a lot of equipment. That's what I love, because then I do it. So if you had to make me choose one thing, I'd say it was that, but of course I can't choose just one thing.
That's brilliant. So we could summarize, like body weight based leg movements that don't require equipment. So
absolutely.
Some of the stuff that like Daryl Edwards you showed me, we're doing the hip. And surprisingly, so it was at a restaurant in Southern Cal, and all these people thought we were actually like fighting, but we were both winded for like 40 seconds afterwards. Like it was amazing. Just what we can demonstrate that after if you want to.
Yeah, I think we should. It's about that's fun, right?
Yeah,
that's fun. So
that coordination, balance, everything.
Everything, and I do that with my 6-year-old. Sorry, well, he's now 7. My 7-year-old boy. I do it with him. I play Daryl's game, Primal Technique, with him, and I'm out of breath. And it's fun, and we're laughing, and it doesn't feel like exercise. And I think that's really, really important. And Mike, I really want to stress the point that physical activity scares people. A lot of people get scared, right? They're like, I can't go to the gym. People will be looking at me. I don't know what I'm doing. There's so many of my friends are like that, so many of my patients are like that. And that's why I always try and come up with things But I have this 5-minute kitchen workout that I put out in the first series because I find the kitchen a fantastic place to work out. So, if spinach is steaming there for 3 or 4 minutes, with the kids often before dinner, we'll be knocking out 20 squats together and having fun. It doesn't have to be this thing where you find 45 minutes to get to the gym. If you want to do that, that's great, right? I don't have a problem with that. But I'm trying to simplify it. You can do so much on your stairs. It really doesn't have to be that difficult.
Yeah, really good advice. And you mentioned kind of your morning routine while coffee's brewing. What is your ideal morning routine?
I guess perfect morning routine for me is get up at 5, sort of tiptoe down the stairs. If I don't tiptoe, my daughter or my son will hear and they'll come down, and then there ain't no morning routine anymore. Yeah. But assuming I can get downstairs without waking them, I'll come, I'll have 2 big glasses of water. It's a simple way for me to make sure I'm drinking enough water is I get 2 in first thing. Often I'll put a bit of lemon in it. Then I'll sit there for 10 minutes, 15 minutes sometimes, and I'll meditate. At the moment I'm using Headspace because I'm struggling to switch off at the moment. And so at the moment it's quite nice for me to press play and listen to someone guide me through it. Whereas other times I can just sit there. But so meditation for me is quite important. Then I will meticulously weigh out my coffee. And whilst it's in the French press brewing, I'll then do some glute activation exercises. So these step ups. And I really feel good when I've done a bit of light movement in the morning. It's nothing heavy, there's no weights there, it just gets my body moving. I feel really, really good at that point. I try not to put on social media, my phone. I don't always manage it, but I generally find that if I don't go on social media first thing in the morning, or I don't go on my emails first thing in the morning, I tend to have a better day. I tend to just be a lot calmer. Yeah. That's probably what an ideal morning looks like to me. And then I guess if I'm feeling motivated and I've got time, I'll maybe come in here and do some sort of lunges. I'll do some sort of kind of sort of mobility exercises, some squatting, and often one of my kids will then come and join. But then they join in.
It's awesome.
So I love it because I think, all right, well, why don't you join me? And then I'm hoping to lead by example with them because I can keep telling them what they should be doing, but I think it's much better if they see daddy do it every day. Yeah. I think they're much more likely to go, oh, I'm going to try and do that as well. So that's probably my ideal morning.
Yeah, that's awesome. One thing that I found with the not getting into the email and the social media thing, and the temptation there is when you're using the apps to help with meditate. So you have to really be exercise that willpower first thing in the morning. Otherwise, it's tempting to go, well, let me just check in on Instagram real quick, and then it turns into a 10-minute ordeal. So, key.
You're right, because it's tricky. It's so nice to have it on the phone, but then by switching your phone on, that's why it's much better if I can actually not put an app on and just sit there for 10 minutes and reflect. And actually, now that it's getting summer here, sometimes I'll go in the garden and I find just the breeze or the birds that allows me to switch off. So there's quite a big shift for me when it's light and it's summer outside. I can then get outside and that helps me. And then I have no phone then, so that's much better.
You know what? And then the added stimulation from the sound, the birds, it really helps you to just focus on that instead of the monkey mind, I found.
Exactly. Yeah,
much
exactly.
Easier. Yeah, really good stuff. So, okay, herb, nutrient, or botanical, you just cannot live without. You're going to be stranded on a desert island. We talked about vitamin D earlier. Vitamin D and omega-3s are covered. What are you bringing with you?
Yeah, it's such a difficult question, Mike, because trying to narrow it down to one, what am I bringing with me? I'd probably go with magnesium. Yeah. It's not that there's so many, B vitamins, turmeric, there's so many, but I'd probably go with magnesium. I think magnesium is the relaxation mineral. I think it's phenomenal what it does. If you're making me choose, Mike, I'll go magnesium.
Magnesium.
But the other nutrient I'd bring is meditation. And the reason I say that is a little play on words, but it's more, every patient when they leave my room, I say, guys, this supplement list is a supplementary list, right? If you're only going to do one of these things, forget the supplements, do the lifestyle stuff. I'm really, really big on that. So, big fan of magnesium, but I think if you could bring something to remind you to meditate every day, it'd be even better.
Oh, that's brilliant. You know, so many doctors tell me that patients come in and they bring a box of supplements and they don't even remember what is doing what anymore, and they're not working on some of the lifestyle things thinking that the supplements are going to kind of fill that void. But so that's a really important point.
Yeah.
Speaking of lifestyle things, if you were to bump shoulders with a parliament member or president of a foreign country, maybe someone from the World Health Organization, they turn to you and say, Dr. Chatterjee, you know, you're out there really making big changes. You're an influencer
on social media, circles and so forth within the traditional media via BBC. What lifestyle tip would you want me to maybe influence some policy around so we can really make the pie more healthier? What would you say to them?
Well, food's the obvious one, right? Food's the obvious one. I think what I'd say to them is, you are currently pouring money into a broken system. If you want to effect change, you've got to go back to basics, right? Thinking a bit of taxing this here, or thinking just reducing a little bit in processed food here is going to make a massive difference. I think you're fighting the wrong battle. Let's get back to basics. Let's get kids taught how to cook in every single school. Let's get junk food out of every single hospital. How can we be serious about changing the population, changing the health of the population, when in schools, when in hospitals, it's full of crap? Yeah. It just doesn't make any sense. And I'd really push home that point. I'd also make sure they teach mindfulness to every single child in every single school, because these days, and I'm seeing it in kids and teenagers in my practice all the time, not being able to switch off is endemic, and it's causing big problems. And I think we struggle as adults, right? How are kids going to cope in this world? And I really worry about that. So yeah, I'm sorry I've expanded your answer, Mike. But
no, it's beautiful.
It's probably those two.
Yeah, really great point. I do worry about the children, because I mean, it's great that we're exposing kids to iPads and iPhones, but then we do see a lot of kids where that's kind of, it's like an extension of their extremities, which is pretty crazy. So it's really good. That mindfulness component is key.
What about getting companies involved? Things like, you know, I always think about this. People used to go out for smoking breaks, right? It used to be smoking shelters. What about like some sort of green nature shelters where you're actually encouraged in the morning to get out for 10 minutes? You know, they could afford the time for people to take smoking breaks. So why don't we utilize that time and push people and almost make it mandatory? We shouldn't make it mandatory, but almost, you know,
put some incentive in there.
Yeah, some incentive to get out, get outside for 10 minutes, look at the trees, hear the birds, you know, get off your chair, you know, moving down the stairs to get outside. You know, it's these little things that you do every day. They become your new habits. Those habits become your health. It's not the big, you know, the big 1 hour CrossFit workout you do on a Sunday, right? Great if you want to do that, but it's what you do day in, day out. That is what your health is. Yeah. And that's what we need to change.
Beautifully said. Love it. Well, before we part ways, I just want to have a moment of gratitude and also thank our mutual friend James Maskell for introducing us kind of on a formal level. We went out to lunch and so forth. So thanks, James, if you're listening to this or watching this. Really appreciate that. And thanks to you, Dr. Chatterjee, for really moving the needle forward and helping to distill some of these complex ideas with lifestyle medicine and make it really actionable for people. I think, you know, there's a lot of, myself included, we get lost in the nuances sometimes and overcomplicate things. And you're just trying to really help a lot of people make lifestyle changes that have huge sweeping impacts in their health. So I want to congratulate you for that.
Thanks, Mike.
And The Power of Balance, which is going to come out early 2018, January 2018.
Yeah.
We'll put that in the show notes. If people are listening to this, you can check that out below in the YouTube description. Keep up the great work.
Thanks, Mike.
Appreciate you coming on.